She clearly wasn't pleased. Throughout the game, there was also talk that Aya Wilson might be speaking with Becky Hammon since the two have always shared a close friendship. But what happens when someone who has ruled the sport for years suddenly faces a new star who refuses to stay in the background? For a long time, Aya Wilson stood at the top of women's basketball. She collected MVP awards, won championships, and was widely recognized as the league's biggest name. Then everything changed with one important decision. Behind the scenes, people began looking toward the future, and the spotlight Wilson believed belonged to her alone started moving toward Caitlin Clark, the very player she had often appeared to dismiss. The question became whether confidence kept her from seeing what was happening, or whether she simply feared the change that was coming. Caitlin Clark had already become one of the biggest names in basketball. This story is not really about numbers or highlight plays. It is about pride, competition, and how a long-running personal conflict can eventually reshape an entire era. Sometimes the biggest challenge is not the rival standing in front of you, but the person who quietly takes your place. To understand how everything reached this point, we have to go back to 2022. At that time, Aya Wilson was sitting comfortably at the top of women's basketball. She proudly displayed multiple MVP trophies, celebrated another MVP award, wore championship rings, signed major endorsement deals, appeared on magazine covers, and was regularly praised by analysts as the best player of her generation. She was making WNBA history and believed she had earned every bit of that success through talent and determination. In her mind, she deserved to remain the center of attention and had no interest in sharing that spotlight, especially with a college player from Iowa who had not yet played professionally. Then Caitlin Clark arrived, and everything Wilson believed about her place in the sport began to change. Clark did not slowly build her reputation like most young players. Instead, she immediately captured national attention, broke records, amazed defenders, and quickly became one of the biggest stories in basketball. Soon every arena hosting her games was selling out well before tip-off. Television ratings reached levels the WNBA had chased for years, and sports networks constantly featured her deep three-point shots. Fans watched in amazement as she confidently hit shots from incredible distance. Millions were drawn to her fearless style, reminding longtime basketball fans of legendary players from the past. The media couldn't stop covering her rise, and many people who had never followed women's basketball were suddenly watching her games. Meanwhile, Aya Wilson, who believed she was the undisputed face of the sport, struggled to accept that someone else was receiving the attention she once considered hers alone. Instead of welcoming the new excitement Clark brought to women's basketball and recognizing how her popularity was helping the entire league, Wilson reportedly made a decision that would later create major problems. She stopped viewing Clark as another player helping grow the game and instead treated her as a rival. At first, the signs were subtle enough that many people ignored them. There were social media likes questioning Clark's future, indirect posts that seemed to minimize her accomplishments, and carefully timed content highlighting veteran achievements whenever Clark made headlines. Whenever Clark delivered another unforgettable performance, Wilson's social media often shifted attention back to her own career or included comments about what it truly takes to succeed. When Caitlin Clark was named Time Magazine's 2024 Athlete of the Year, many expected players across the sport to celebrate such an important achievement. Instead, Wilson's online activity appeared distant, showing little excitement and leaving many fans with the impression that she viewed Clark not as someone helping grow women's basketball but as a serious threat to everything she had built. The problem with jealousy is that it rarely stays hidden. According to critics, it became visible through interviews, carefully chosen words about true greatness, increasingly passive-aggressive remarks, and moments when she avoided discussing Clark's accomplishments. Rather than seeing Clark's success as a positive moment for the sport, Wilson reportedly treated every achievement as something that challenged her own legacy. She convinced herself she was standing up for veteran players when, in reality, she was protecting her own position as a younger and more marketable star continued to rise. What she may not have realized was that USA basketball officials were quietly paying attention to everything. While most fans focused on her impressive career, awards, and dominance, there was another issue that received far less attention. Many insiders believed her success depended heavily on favorable officiating, something they referred to as getting a special whistle. Wilson averaged nearly 12 free throw attempts per game in the WNBA, a number that suggested complete dominance. But some observers argued that many of those trips to the line came from drawing contact and convincing referees to call fouls rather than simply finishing plays through physical defense. At first glance, those numbers make Wilson seem almost impossible to stop. Averaging so many free throws suggests defenders have no choice but to foul her. But a closer look at the game film leads some people to a different conclusion. They argue that she has become very skilled at drawing contact and convincing officials to blow the whistle. Many of her drives to the basket end with dramatic reactions, and even clean defensive plays are often followed by appeals for fouls. Critics believe her scoring is supported not only by talent, but also by officiating that frequently favors offensive players. Within the WNBA, that style can be very effective because the rules often protect scorers. Officials are familiar with the league's biggest stars, and the system rewards that approach. International basketball, however, is very different. FIBA officials are not influenced by MVP awards, endorsement deals, or social media popularity. They allow much more physical play, and the type of contact that often sends Wilson to the free throw line in the WNBA is usually ignored during international games. According to this view, Team USA evaluators noticed a major difference during exhibition contests. When officials allowed tougher defense and stopped rewarding attempts to draw fouls, Wilson's scoring efficiency dropped significantly. Without those frequent whistles, her offensive rhythm changed completely. Some believe her game works best in the WNBA environment, while that same advantage does not exist in Olympic or World Cup competition. Caitlin Clark, on the other hand, is presented as a player whose scoring does not depend on officiating. She regularly makes deep three-pointers that defenders simply cannot stop. Even when defenders make contact, she keeps playing instead of looking for a foul. Her long-range shooting, step-back threes, court vision, and basketball intelligence allow her to create offense through skill rather than relying on whistles. Because of that, supporters believe her style can succeed on any court in the world. Watching both players side by side highlights the difference. Wilson is often described as creating contact before waiting for the referee's decision, while Clark adjusts through contact and still finishes the play. One approach is said to fit the current WNBA style, while the other is viewed as effective in every competition because it depends only on basketball ability. Everything changed when Team USA announced its preliminary roster for the 2026 World Cup. The tournament also plays a key role in qualifying for the 2028 Olympics. According to the story, Wilson did not find her name on the list. Reports claimed she reacted with frustration after realizing the player she had spent years trying to downplay had now taken the opportunity she believed belonged to her. It was also reported that she immediately began contacting people within USA Basketball, hoping for answers, while her representatives tried to arrange meetings with coaches who had already shifted their focus to the selected players. At the same time, Clark was congratulated by teammates, coaches, and fans as she prepared for the chance to represent her country. The difference in their reactions became another major talking point. Clark simply thanked everyone and expressed excitement about learning from experienced teammates without demanding extra attention. Meanwhile, Wilson's side reportedly suggested scheduling conflicts as the reason behind the situation, although many people viewed those explanations as an attempt to protect her image after being left off the roster. According to this narrative, Team USA coaches had been watching Wilson's actions for nearly 2 years before making their final choice. Every indirect comment, social media activity, and interview mentioning Clark was said to be carefully noted. The belief is that the coaches wanted players who would place team success ahead of personal feelings and support one another instead of creating division. At the international level, talent alone is not enough. Players must perform under enormous pressure while representing their country in front of the entire world. They must stay calm despite difficult crowds, unfamiliar environments, and officiating they may not agree with. Every celebration, reaction, and moment is seen by a global audience. The Olympic stage reveals far more than basketball ability. It also shows the character, discipline, and maturity of every athlete wearing their nation's uniform. Think about it for a moment. If a player struggles to deal with criticism from fans online or reacts emotionally whenever people question her achievements, many would argue she may also struggle with the intense pressure of representing Team USA on the biggest international stage. The same argument applies to someone who responds to another player's success with visible frustration instead of genuine support. Coaches building a championship team want athletes who celebrate each other's accomplishments, not players who create tension inside the locker room. Team USA coaches understand how important chemistry is because they have seen talented teams fall apart under pressure. In many cases, the biggest problem was never a lack of ability but too much ego and not enough emotional maturity. One player with the wrong attitude can damage a team's unity far more quickly than any opponent. According to this view, Wilson's reported reaction after being left off the roster only reinforced the coach's decision. Instead of quietly accepting the outcome and using it as motivation, reports claimed she reacted emotionally for several days. Her attempts to explain the decision and seek answers were presented as signs that she struggled to accept the result. Supporters of this argument believe that kind of response could become a serious problem during Olympic competition. Imagine reacting that way after a difficult loss in a gold medal game. Imagine that same frustration being directed toward teammates, coaches, officials, or the media during an international tournament. Those are exactly the situations coaches try to avoid when selecting a roster. In contrast, Caitlin Clark is presented as someone who has spent the past 2 years dealing with constant criticism without publicly responding in the same way. She has faced intense attention, repeated controversy, and criticism unlike almost anyone else in women's basketball, yet she has continued handling those situations calmly. That steady approach has helped attract major sponsors and given decision-makers confidence in her ability to represent the United States. While Wilson was accused of sharing questionable social media activity and making indirect comments, Clark simply focused on improving her game. While Wilson was said to be downplaying a younger player's success, Clark consistently spoke about learning from experienced teammates and doing whatever she could to help the team. The difference between those approaches became a major talking point. Supporters also